The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, we are well into the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. 3 series are ongoing. 1 is already over. We'll get to that at some point. I'd like to start with Montreal and Buffalo. We saw Game 3 yesterday at the Bell Center. I watched from home on TV. I presume you were also home. We weren't actually at the Bell Center. It looked awesome. It would have been great to be there. But the Canadians have a lead on the Buffalo Sabres in their second round series. What do you make of how that series has started so far?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, the games themselves haven't been close, but obviously it feels like the series is close. And, I think the numbers reflect that. If you look at kind of the even strength play, right now it looks like Jakub Dobeš has certainly outperformed the goaltending at the other end for Buffalo. So that might be an area where Montreal has an edge. But, I saw a lot of sort of takes, or the flavor seemed to be that the building is something that the Sabres have to overcome. And look, I've said it for years here and elsewhere that it's my favorite place to go to a big game. But, at the same time, Montreal was 1-2 at home in the first round against Tampa. So, it's just such a different series, especially than the Canadians had in round 1. That was all 1-goal games. They all felt so tight, like every mistake could swing the series one way or another. This one's been a little more free flowing. We saw some of the, the bad vibes are there, what you'd expect in playoff hockey, especially in Game 3 as it got on late to, some sort of questionable plays. But, this one, it's harder for me to get my head around because, you're seeing 5-2 games and things like that. So, by no means do I think it's over, or that Montreal, just because they have a 2-1 edge in the series, has figured something out. This one feels a little more volatile. Whereas, I was thinking Lightning Canadians was so tight. And honestly, that's what we're seeing around the league. I mean, that Minnesota Colorado series is actually close, but it's like there's a 9-6 game, a 5-2 game, 5-1. Like, it's the second round has been kind of strange. And then, of course, Carolina's already all the way through. I won't jump ahead to that, but it's been a real difference kind of in the second round, I think, than the first in terms of what we've seen with the matchups. I
do want to get to some of the rough play at the end of Game 3 between Montreal and Buffalo. 2 plays stand out to me. Arbor Jackeye getting a punch in. I don't remember on which Buffalo Sabre it was in the corner, but yeah. So Sam Carrick, that looked really bad on that front. And then Josh Norris on another Canadiens player as he's falling. 2 questionable plays for me at the end of that game. I would love to know your opinion on if there's a world where either of those plays get disciplined, whether it's a fine, could be a suspension. What do you make of how that game ended?
Yeah, I would expect there'll be something. It's hard to know. Playoffs, obviously, player safety, it can be tricky at the best of times to figure out what they're going to do, but especially, suspending players for playoff games is not something that's done lightly. We saw Ridley Gregg get a 2-game suspension to start next regular season for a sucker punch at the end of that Ottawa Carolina series. I don't know how they're going to view, especially the Jackeye one. To me, is more of a decision. He comes face to face with Carrick. Carrick has both hands on his sticks around the waist level area. So there's no danger that they're going to engage in a fight in that moment, and then drops him with a gloved punch. I mean, seems to be the definition of a sucker punch to me, but I don't know if that ends up costing him a game. I don't like the Benson one, the Norris one. I don't know why I had Benson in my mind, but the Norris one either, but that play is a little more chaotic. There's more happening there.
Zach Bolduc is on the other end of that. He's in like a bit of a headlock with another player. And again, as he's falling, Norris takes a swing at it.
Yeah.
It is chaos, but
the reason it's different to me, and I'm not excusing it. I don't like it.
No,
but the difference is when I look at like Ridley Gregg on Walker, comes up, he knows Walker's not going to hit him and he chooses to hit him. I feel like it's similar with Jackeye and Carrick, where it's like, he's looking at him. He knows he's not going to get punched himself, and he throws the punch. Look, I'm fine if Norris also gets disciplined here. Like, I'm not, but that one's just, it's a little harder for me to tell what's going on because the play is active, but it's clear his intent. Like, he's attempting to punch a guy who's engaged with his teammates. So, it's still the same variety. It's just that one's a little more scrambly. Yeah, I mean, look, player safety we know is not going to invoke itself any more than it needs to, but I would be surprised if there's not at least fines in this situation, because it sort of sends the message without fully sending it. But, in the moment, I don't like, the other thing I don't like about the Jack Eye one is like 2 seconds left in the game. It's a one-sided game. Like, it feels like the guy's taking a pound of flesh when he's got a chance, That was my other sort of, in the moment, that was definitely my thought is, it was a choice and probably the wrong one. And I even heard Kevin Bieksa say on the Sportsnet broadcast after the game, like, he'll probably regret that one when he looks back at it, just from the players' end of things. And, look, the emotions of the games are part of what makes the playoffs what they are. Obviously, it was a rocking building and a huge win for Montreal. And, I can understand how those things get the best of you. This isn't a character trial by any means, but I do think that the league has to judge the actions, and I would expect some kind of discipline, probably from both those plays.
Okay. I mean, we mentioned the fact that the atmosphere is as amazing as it is at the Bell Center. I know we both don't cover the Canadiens regularly, but like, do you get FOMO watching these games, considering how the atmosphere has been at the Bell Center throughout this postseason?
No, I wouldn't say I do. I mean, look, I went to the games in Edmonton. I actually think that building in Edmonton is louder than the Bell Center, to be honest. I think
Rogers Arena is like top 3 loudest.
But even they do the decibel meter. I think it got to 113. The one of the games I was there, I think Bell Center got to 106. I mean, look, I don't know if those are fair readings. That's what they're showing on the scoreboard. Like, I get that you could maybe juice it, but the Bell Center, to me, it's got more like, it's more like artistic or something. I can't explain it. It's like less just like crazy like I don't know. There's just something about it. Very unique feeling in that building. I love the steep stands, even all the red. I don't know. Just something about the feel there is special. But I wouldn't say I necessarily have FOMO. I mean, I've been lucky. I've been to a lot of big games. I enjoy watching on my TV too. I can be at home with my family. And look, if the Canadiens play long enough, I'm sure I'll get there this spring at some point.
Yeah, we'll see about that. I'll do a quick whip around on the 3 other series, including one that, of course, as we mentioned, already over. Anaheim and Vegas are tied at 2. What do you make of how that series has gone? And is there a world where the Anaheim Ducks upset the Vegas Golden Knights in round 2? Yeah,
if we had a button where I could like push it and an alarm goes off, I'm hitting the upset alert on this series for sure. I actually think the Ducks have carried the play so far across 4 games, 5-on-5 anyways. Mark Stone being injured for Vegas. I don't know how available he's going to be moving forward, but missed game 4 on Sunday. That's a huge swing point, potentially. The question for me with the Ducks, like the Ducks won more games in regular season than Vegas did. So it's definitely an upset. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but it's probably not as grand of upset as the way it might be portrayed if it happens. Just when you actually look at the seasons the teams had, the Ducks were still gauging, are they ready, right? Like, are they going to make a crucial mistake? I mean, even late in that game, it's 4-2, game 4. Cutter Gauthier has a chance to ice it into an empty net, gets a little too cute. The puck's poked away. Vegas goes down and scores 4-3. Now, it didn't end up costing them, but, I just think there's always the possibility the Ducks, it's a big spot for them. They already beat out Edmonton. Now they're getting deeper in the playoffs. They played 10 games. Obviously, fatigue starts to set in. Like, it's hard to keep playing and playing and playing and being at your best. But, I definitely think based on what we've seen, I could see Anaheim winning it. I just don't know. Are they going to be able to keep finding just another gear and keep pushing forward as this gets deeper and actually finish off another team, or will the flip side happen? But they've played well in the series, and frankly, I think they have more players going than Vegas does. And so, yeah, this one's given me 7 games vibes, to be honest. It's been a little closer than the other ones in terms of the games themselves. And I could see Anaheim playing on. I wouldn't have predicted that at the start of the playoffs. Obviously, we did our brackets at SDP, and I had the Oilers going to the Cup. So I certainly had the Oilers beating Anaheim in round 1. Wasn't in the cards. And so the more I watch the Ducks, it could be their time to come out of the Pacific. And look, I guess should we be that surprised in a sense where, how did we talk about the Pacific all year? Forget even the pillow fight comment, just more, it was a hard division to call. Anaheim was in the mix. Vegas, obviously Utah jumped into that division with playing Vegas. But Edmonton, it was just a weird division all year. LA stayed in the playoff hunt in part because the Pacific was not as strong as in the past. And ultimately made the first round. So it just was a strange season for that division, and it would be kind of fitting, I guess, if Anaheim was the team that emerged from 2 rounds of the playoffs. But they're only halfway home. Not going to count the Golden Knights out, but they're not home and cooled yet. Just either. I think that there's probably real reason for concern for Vegas too.
But at the same time, Mitch Marner cannot do it all on his own for Vegas.
You're right. Marner cannot do it on his own. And that's the playoff scoring leader right now, Julian. So
he is.
The takes have been pretty spicy as Mitch has had himself a spring here and especially been impactful in terms of producing offense, against the Ducks. And it's kind of funny, just the whole thing, the way it's worked out. I'll say this, I might as well throw my 2 cents in on this storyline. First of all, you look at some of the teams that Marner and the Leafs went through over 9 years, a little harder on smaller skilled forwards probably than what he's faced so far with Utah and Anaheim. But I'm still not taking anything away from him. The sort of, for me, the narrative was always there for changing every playoff year in Toronto. And Marner's now in the process potentially of changing it in Vegas for himself. But I mean, that was always the beauty, even as much as, the Leafs failed to get on the kind of playoff run they wanted. I mean, even last spring, they're in game 7 of the second round. If they win that, if they go on and win in the conference final, get to the narratives would have changed then. Do you know what I mean? They weren't written in stone. They weren't carved into something you can't change. It was always do it. And right now, as we were recording this, Mitch Marner has 16 points. That's the most in his playoff career. And so it doesn't change the fact that 9 previous playoff years, he didn't have that kind of on ice success in terms of his production. And, he's never played for a team that made it beyond round 2. So, if those things start to happen for him with the Golden Knights, of course, the way we talk about him should change, or the way we view him. I mean, I think that's the beauty, I think, for any player as we enter the playoffs, is that if you can, it doesn't matter what you did before. I mean, Alex Ovechkin played once beyond the second round. Well, he won the Stanley Cup. And so for the rest of his life, what are we bringing up? Probably more than the fact that his teams consistently fell short. We're probably going to mention that Stanley Cup because it was pretty special and he played a huge part in it. So, I'm always up for narrative changing. I don't think these things have to be permanent, and Mitch has a great chance right now to do that with the Golden Knights.
So
where do you fall on this? Are you dunking on Toronto, or are you thinking that
I'm not dunking. I'm not dunking on anyone as far as I'm concerned. There's no one who deserves to be dunked on as far as I'm concerned. I just think it's cool for Mitch Marner that he's finding success in Vegas. And I also think it's cool that he's finding success with John Tortorella, a dynamic that I think some people I had questions about when those two.
I knew this was going to work.
I knew you were on that side. I was not sure. I wasn't saying, it was not going to work. I just wasn't sure. But I knew for sure you were totally on the side of it working. Yeah,
because Tortorella has his players back. And the other thing with Marner is, for him, it was never a lack of commitment or care. I don't think anyone who spent time around him, but I think even the fans that didn't and just watched him, honestly, some of the years where he almost became ineffective, it was almost like he cared too much, which is a hard thing to say. But from where we sit, he was trying. That was never, I don't think that was ever questioned in Toronto, is his commitment or desire or any of those things. But it wasn't effective in a lot of those years. And again, they were going up against the prime years of the Lightning, the Panthers, and the Bruins. They did have a tougher road, I think, than what Vegas has traveled. But I'm not even putting that up as an excuse. It's just it's a weird factor of this year's playoffs, right? like some teams we can say lost in round one. Tampa lost in round one. That's a fact, right? Mm-hmm. They played a series against Montreal where they vastly outshot them in game 7 and every game was a 1-goal game. So it was obviously a very close series in a tougher division. You know, Philly made it out of round one. They played Pittsburgh. Those were 2 of the lowest point teams in the Eastern Conference to make the playoffs. Then they got into round 2 and they got mowed down by Carolina pretty quickly. Like, does that mean Philly had a better year than Tampa? Probably not. But if we're just going based on like, well, technically they won a playoff round and Tampa didn't. I guess my point is there's a little bit of nuance I think that gets lost in these evaluations. And I get it. At the end, only one team wins. There's no excuses. Like, it's not about who you played and how long. Like, you have to go through good teams and you have to beat 4 of them to win the cup and all those sort of things that are true. But with Marner, yeah, some context is lost. And honestly, look, he left. I think he needed a fresh start. Like, he chose to leave, first of all, and which he was allowed to do. I mean, you're right. You played this long in the league. You get a chance to be free agency. He took it, and he wanted a fresh start. He wanted a new look at it. I think he wanted to see things from a different perspective, and it's paying off. Look, he's been great in these playoffs. Like, if you look at like the way his scoring has come to, like, he's had some big plays on, 3 shorthanded points. He's been part of their power play, but he's also producing an even strength. Like, it's right across the board. Him and Howden especially got on a great run here, at the end of the Utah series and into the round against Anaheim. And, they're it's sort of put up or shut up time across the league, and good for him because he's, we're seeing in other markets, right? Whether it's Caulfield in Montreal or, when the top players don't produce, they do get questioned in the playoffs everywhere. And when they do produce, that's when we start writing really fawning stories and talk about how awesome you are. And that's the way it should be.
I guess the only thing I want to say, I don't want to turn this into a whole Marner segment. It's just,
it's kind of is a Marner segment now. It's like 6 minutes deep.
It's very fair, but like the one thing I would just push back and say, not every series that Marner had with the Leafs was supposed to be like, oh man, he's going up against these prime teams. The 2 teams that come to mind, obviously, it's the Montreal Canadiens series in 2021, the first round, which the Leafs had a lead in and they did not get the job done. There was the play-in round against Columbus where they lost against pretty sure it was a John Tortorella team.
Yeah. That was 5 games in a bubble. And I think he actually
and
produced
even that 7-game
offense.
series you mentioned against Florida last year, the Leafs led in that series before they lost it.
Well, it's not like he didn't ever have a point, right? The problem was he didn't have a lot of production and he wasn't alone in games like 5, 6, and 7. When it got down to the real business end of the Leafs trying to close out a series, he and his teammates, the production fell right off. Really, I think William Nylander, I haven't refreshed myself on these stats because it's been a year, but I'm pretty sure William Nylander of the group with Matthews and Tavares and Marner was the one exception that he consistently did get a goal or an assist in those big games, but the other guys didn't follow suit.
Anyway, my ultimate point is not every series was a cakewalk. I could understand that, but there were some series he should have found a way, and ultimately he should go down to his team and not just on the player, but there were some series for the taking for Mitch Marner and the Leafs at that point. But that being said, look in the past. They
didn't get swept in any of those series. They always got to game 5 when it was a best of 5 or game 7. Like, they always got to like where they were 1 goal short. You know what I mean? They lost to Tampa the one year 2-1 in game 7. And they lost to Boston 2-1 in overtime in game 7, the most recent one when Pasternak scored in overtime. Like, they were 1 offensive play short multiple years from having a totally different narrative. And so obviously their offensive players wear that to some degree.
Absolutely. But as my dad says, you can't get beat all the time. And the fact that Mitch Marner is turning those losses into an opportunity in Vegas. Well, look, he still has to get out of the second round this time, but I do like the fact that Mitch Marner is rewriting his own narrative in the Western Conference and is seeing some success. I genuinely think it's a cool story, and I'm not here to troll. To allude to your earlier question, I'm not here to troll. I think it's a cool story.
Straight up. I mean, it's what the playoffs are about. It's a chance to, even the greatest of them all win like 5 cups out of 20 years or whatever. You know what I mean? Like the absolute greatest careers involve failure 2/3 of the time in the playoffs or lack of ultimate success, even if we don't want to call it failure. So, the whole point is you got to keep pushing on and eventually get it done. And Marner, look, there's a lot of runway on this spring still, but he's looking in a way like he could change that narrative on him for good. But they got to get by the Ducks. And as I mentioned, I already slammed the button. I've got upset warning on this series right now after seeing them through 4 games.
All right. Thanks for tapping in on Mitch Marner Corner on the Chris Johnston Show. I'd love to know your thoughts on Minnesota and Colorado. In a perfect world, this should be the Western Conference Final. I just think the pace and the talent we are seeing in that series is on a completely different level compared to the other series we've seen. I get that some may argue that the second round hasn't been as exciting as the first round. And I get that the way that these games have gone 3 games into Minnesota, Colorado have been a little weird in terms of the scoring and the offense, but I'm having a lot of fun watching this series 3 games in.
Yeah, the 3 wins have come by a field goal or more. So, I mean,
that's it.
It's not what you think of, like tense, tight, double overtime kind of. But look, there's still time for that because this series is actually, it's pretty close too, despite some of the wonky scores and some of the things we've seen. I mean, both teams have had a goaltending decision, which is always kind of interesting and, kind of makes sense. I mean, both these teams are very much, if you look across the year, we're very much sort of A-B goalies or 1A, 1B. And so you get this deep into the spring, like, yeah, you don't have a bona fide number one. He's not going to play 7, 8, 9, 10 really good games in a row because it's just not something Wedgwood, Blackwood, even Wallstad and Gustafsson, like those guys haven't done that this season. They've been part of platoons. And so I think that's sort of an interesting dynamic in terms of especially where the Avalanche go with their goalie for game 4. And because it's worthy of being a Western Conference Final, and I certainly agree with your contention there, I'd like to see this go 7 too. I hope we have a big week in this series and that the games tighten up in terms of some compelling, like who's going to win it in the moment games. And this series goes the distance because, unfortunately, if that happens, Carolina's going to end up sitting for like a week and a half. They could have done a European barnstorming tour between rounds here, as I joked the last one. But, I do think we're probably going to get it's actually possible all 3 of the remaining series go 7 games. So even though there is some, we'll call it low key, I don't know if it's full on hate, but there's been some people pointing out the second round hasn't been as compelling as the first round. I still think there's a chance for that to flip this week and all of these series could go 7. Wouldn't surprise me. I think there's not enough telling me one team or the other in each of these remaining 3 series is so much better that they're just going to, win it, get 2 more wins and win it in 5.
Yeah, no complaints for me if it gets to that point. To Carolina, the fact that they're 8-0 to start off this postseason, is this the year they make it to the Stanley Cup final, which they haven't done in 20 years? But considering what they've been able to do under Rod Brind'Amour, they've been building towards that moment. Well,
it should be the year. I mean, like they're going to be favored, I think it's fair to say, in the Eastern Conference Final. And they have everything you need. They have experience. Their goals against has been ridiculous. They've been getting great goaltending from Frederik Andersen, but their defensive play as a team is a strength. And then they're getting, offensive contributions up and down the lineup, whether Stankoven, obviously Taylor Hall had a big go, and they just feel like a team that can get it done. And then the flip side of the conversation is they're going to be facing either Montreal or Buffalo, which, both great stories and both, compelling young organizations. We expect to have lots of playoff runs in the years ahead, but they're going to have that upper hand in terms of experience and all those things being on that stage. And on top of that, they're going to be rested. I mean, look, they might end up having a sluggish game 1 after all this, to start the Eastern Conference Final. But I have to believe over the length of a series, having the rest that they've built in by having back-to-back sweeps to start the playoffs is going to be a positive, much more than a negative. I think back to that Kings team. I want to say it was their 2012 Cup team. They won in like 4 or 5-4. Like they didn't play much that spring, and they found a way to do it. So I don't think the long layoff. Well, there definitely will be that conversation, the sort of rust and rest debate. I think it's an advantage, big picture. Again, it might be tough for game 1 if they're playing either Montreal or Buffalo, jumping right into a game 1 coming off potentially a game 7, like with, you're just keeping it rolling and you're a little more crisp. But, if that's the case, Montreal will have played 14 games because they went 7 in round one. I think at minimum that series with Buffalo is probably going 6 games. So it's going to be 13 or 12 games for whichever team emerges from that series coming into this round. And Carolina will be playing its 9th game to start the 3rd round. So the Hurricanes have done everything you want to do. They're controlling the things they control. They've won some overtime games. It's not like it's not like every game has been 5-1 for them through these 8, but I don't even have the records in front of me, but it's ridiculous how few teams have done this, especially kind of what we'll call in the modern era. This is. I
don't think any team has started a postseason 8-0. I think since the playoff format from. There's an ESPN stat that's kind of escaping me right now, but I don't think it's happened in essentially the modern era. A team that has started out as dominant as they have.
Right, and 2 goals against or less in each of the 8 games. I mean, there's your recipe for success. And so it might be Carolina's year, honestly. I mean, it's hard to conclude otherwise based on what we've seen. I mean, we can only really judge what's happening on the ice, and they've taken care of their business. It'd be interesting to see what they do at this time to try to stay fresh because, they're home and cool already. The Eastern Conference Final could start as late as May 20th. Even right now, we're only at May 11th. So, I mean, that would still be another 9 days from today. And they finish off that series over the weekend against the Flyers. So, a couple days off and then I'm sure lots of practice and they'll try to spice things up wherever they can. But, there's just no way it's bad news because, those were some pretty physical games you saw against Ottawa. I remember especially that 4th game of that series, got spicy at times against Philly. So I'm sure they're nursing some bruises that will get a chance to heal here in this week and a half that they're going to have before starting round 3.
Okay, officially, no team since the playoff format of 4 best-of-7 series to get to the Stanley Cup has ever started a playoffs 8-0. Since 1987, since we've seen all 4 series turn to best-of-7s, no team has ever started the postseason 8-0 until the Carolina Hurricanes. Officially, I want that on the record.
What's the weirdest remaining Stanley Cup we could get? Like, would it be like Carolina, Anaheim?
What does weird mean in your scenario?
I guess weird, it's not even a shot at it. It's more just like least likely. Like if we had told CJ and Julian back in October, this season was going to end with Carolina and Anaheim playing a best-of-7, would that be like among the possibilities that are still possible? Like Colorado, I don't think no one would have been surprised at the start of the year after watching the first month of the season, after watching the first half. Like Colorado all year long looked like a team that could be a cup team.
If you're basing it off of of what we thought at the beginning of the season to now, it's Buffalo Anaheim.
Buffalo Anaheim, good call.
That is the correct answer because you remember when you said that the Buffalo Sabres could be a playoff team, I yelled, what? Like I was very surprised at that. And then the Anaheim Ducks, how many people pegged them as a playoff team entering this season? Buffalo Anaheim would be the weirdest cup final. That would be the weirdest cup final. But a lot of people in 2007 would be very happy at that.
Yeah, Minnesota is kind of a surprise, but even they've at least been a playoff team the last number of years. They hadn't won playoff rounds in a long time, but we probably didn't see that coming. We started our September pods going, what are they going to do with Kaprizov? And these guys, like, what's going on? And obviously they've flipped their own momentum and everything. So yeah, it's kind of a funny grouping of teams left. I guess Carolina and Colorado, to be fair, no one would be that surprised at either of them. They've been good teams for a long time. Colorado's case, they won a cup a few years ago with the same pieces that are on this team. Carolina's been knocking at the door. But if any of the other groupings of teams get in, it's going to be kind of like an unusual cup final. Anyway, there's just a random thought.
Okay, so I'll take your question and flip it to what would you say is the most fun matchup potential left? Like Colorado Montreal looks fun. Just off of storylines and the connections of the teams and, Patrick Roy playing on both teams at one point, like that could be fun,
Yeah, I could talk myself into that. Even honestly, I could talk myself into like Anaheim, Montreal being fun because Anaheim's like this sort of like Montreal. They're 2 teams with like a lot of young, skilled players. And it would be very like nobody would have saw this coming probably on either side. I mean, maybe a few people thought the Canadians were capable of a cup run, but I think realistically, this felt like something that was they're gonna need to progress through it over multiple years, and that still might be the case. I'm not trying to by any means say that they're one step from the Cup final, but yeah, I could talk myself into those teams being fun. Anyway,
okay. Just we might as well throw in the hypotheticals. Why not? Before we get out of here, we did ask CJ on Thursday, so we can move that to next week. But I do want to.
Oh, I didn't mention if we got Carolina Vegas in the Cup final, you might have. I'm just saying you might have a debate about Freddie Anderson versus Mitch Marner for Conn Smythe. So that would have some leafy undertones to it.
I think it'd be fun. I could think of at least 3 people who would be. We're
really not trying to make everything about the Leafs, but that possibility is on the table. Like right now, I think Freddie Anderson would be Carolina's Conn Smythe vote. I mean, Taylor Hall would have a spot in that conversation, and Marner is probably Vegas's Conn Smythe vote again. So
it's very.
It's just I'm just saying it's on the table.
Carolina Vegas would be very. Main, like you ever hear main character syndrome? Yeah. We'd hear a lot of that on some Toronto-based outlets throughout that Stanley Cup final. If we got Carolina Vegas, just saying.
I'm sure our brother podcast, the SDP, would probably dig into that potential storyline.
SDP, Overdrive, fan pregame. What other Leaf shows?
I gotta say, out there? I think I've been happy to see Freddie Anderson have this run because I think people sort of hating on his playoff bona fides are like missing a key piece. Like the only question for him over the years in the playoffs is usually pretty much been health, like because he has had trouble stringing together a lot of starts. If you look at, he's played more than 90 playoff games. He's won like 65% of them. He's got a career .916 save percentage in the playoffs. Obviously, he's got great numbers this year with an 8-0 start for his team and him being in net for all those games. But I actually think, I guess maybe some Leaf fans remember Game 7 when there was one Game 7 he was hung up for a bunch of numbers in Boston. But like in general, I don't think he was the reason the Leafs teams lost. For any Leafs fans still holding on to that, I guess just anyone associated with those Leafs teams, like, for some reason get painted a certain way. I mean, do you know who else was on those Leafs teams? Nazem Kadri. And do you know who was awesome when, Colorado won the Cup a couple years ago? Nazem Kadri. Like, Tyler Bozak was on those Leafs teams and then he won a Stanley Cup in St. Louis. Like, I think we've seen it. Phil Kessel was on at least the 2013 team way back when he won those Cups. Like, I think somehow I feel like if people gotten it twisted, I think Freddie Anderson's a really good goaltender. And it's cool to see him showing it so far this spring.
You've officially made Carolina Vegas the least fun option for some of our listeners to the program, or potentially Colorado Carolina to that effect too.
Yeah, which could very well be where we're headed. Frankly, that could very well. I would say that's the most likely Stanley Cup as of right now. In all fairness, and I realize I started a whole other segment. We'll get to that, but Carolina Colorado, I would actually enjoy that because. We've seen in recent years that the regular season only matters so much, and we've seen how unpredictable the Stanley Cup playoffs can be. But there would be something really cool in seeing the best team wire to wire practically in the Western in the NHL, the Colorado Avalanche, and the Carolina Hurricanes who enter the playoffs being the best team in their conference, but a lot of people slept on them from the outside. Coming together in a Stanley Cup final. I actually think that would be really fun to see. I'm not saying we should have it every year where the best seeds in each conference meet each other, but there is something satisfying, particularly if you're on those teams and you're a fan of those teams, where you played like the best team for most of the year and you get your reward of playing in the Stanley Cup final. It doesn't work out that way, and it shouldn't be that way. But every now and again, I do think it is fine to see that come up, particularly with these two teams that I don't have any beef with Colorado. I think Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar are two of the best players in the league, and to see them get an opportunity to play for a cup would be awesome. And then Carolina, which, again, as we established, has been knocking on the door of an opportunity like Plus,
this.
they connected on a pretty big Mikko Rantanen deal in recent history. So there's they're both
there's that.
Both former mistresses of Rantanen. Obviously, both have players in their lineup that are left over from each end of the Rantanen trade that they made. So, there'd be an element of that's kind of interesting too.
Oh man! So the biggest loser out of that one would be Mikko Rantanen. That's
yeah, because that would all be dragged up again. Yeah, well,
that is true. Anyways,
he's got no regrets.
Yeah, he's making a ton of money. He already has a cup. He'll be all right.
Yeah, Dallas isn't going away just because they lost in round one this year. They're gonna be around.
Anyway, of course, keep it locked to the CJ show for us to continue to talk about the playoffs and whatever matchup we end up getting, even if it is Carolina Vegas. Anyway, unless you're going to say something.
Nope.
I thought you were going to add something. You're going to add something. Anyway, I want you to take care of some housekeeping stuff. Do you have any updates with regards to the Leafs? Speaking of them, with Craig Berube and obviously his future with the team as head coach.
Well, he met over the weekend with Matt Sundin and John Chaika, which was expected. I think that meeting it's not just about whether he's still going to coach the team. Sundin and Chaika are still trying to get a handle on what's going on inside this organization and who could have better information than the coach that's been, sort of, for lack of a better term, in the trenches with these guys over years. So I think that it was an opportunity to go over players, to go over, how they went from winning in the Atlantic Division to dropping 30 points in the standings and missing the playoffs this year. All kinds of different things. It's still a decision that is looming out there for what kind of changes these guys might make. I think this week we'll get some clarity on, even the front office makeup, which of the assistant GMs are staying on and which aren't, maybe a little more clarity if the Leafs are going to make external hires. Obviously it's now a week since that sort of uncomfortable, dramatic press conference, but it's been a week of work for Sundin and Chaika, and they're kind of up against the clock. So I think they have to make a lot of big decisions around the organization, Craig Berube being one of them. So I don't have specific updates in terms of how they viewed that meeting. But it's still a decision. I don't think that the call has been made that he's staying 100% at this stage. And we'll just kind of have to see how things progress here. Obviously there's still a meeting to come with Austin Matthews, and his representative in Arizona is expected at some point in the near future. And, I think they're working through the process of basically meeting with the staff, having conversations at all levels of the organization and deciding what it's going to look like going forward. And, that's probably going to mean some people are let go. And I would think we'll probably get clarity on that here in the next few days.
Okay. Do you have any updates on Vancouver's GM search?
Well, they entered the weekend down to two. Evan Gold, the assistant GM in Boston, having emerged to the forefront, and then Ryan Johnson, who's been in the Canucks organization as an AGM there. It seems like the Gold is the likely winner here, if we want to, phrase it as like a race. He was involved, I know, in GM searches in the past. He was also part of the Leafs process, you'll recall. And really well thought of guy with, has worked his way up literally from the mailroom with the Washington Capitals to, a long stint now with the Bruins, is a trained lawyer, helped build their analytics department, has an expertise, I think, in the CBA and cap management and things along those lines. So, it seems as though it's progressing towards him being named, at some point in this week in Vancouver as the next GM. Still curious to see what that how it looks. Is there a senior person above him? It's sort of the same conversation we had in Toronto. And I think we could still have it in Nashville. Believe it or not, Nashville still hasn't filled their GM role, even though they've been at this the longest since Barry Trotz, announced that he wasn't going to return. But whether or not Evan ends up just being the top of the hockey operations pyramid will be interesting to see. But, all signs certainly are pointing to him being the next GM in Vancouver. And, there's a lot of work to do really in all those front offices. Usually when teams are hiring a GM, it's because they've got to a spot they're not happy with. But, between preparing for the draft, where the Canucks, like the Leafs, have a top draft choice, but obviously, a lot of remaking of the roster ahead. Be interesting to see if it's another fresh face. It's been sort of a unique hiring cycle. If we go back to Sonny Maeda ending up in New Jersey, obviously John Chaika in Toronto, if it's Evan Gold in Vancouver, I know Chaika had a previous job in Arizona, but you're talking about sort of fresh blood, I guess, working its way into these front offices.
Kind of funny how Nashville's own search has kind of faded into the background, considering the noise around New Jersey and Sonny Mehta, and obviously Toronto with what ended up happening there, and Vancouver looks like they're on the cusp of finishing theirs. It's kind of funny how Nashville's kind of been like oh yeah, right, they need a GM pick.
Well, my understanding at one point is they met with a ton of people, and then they were getting to where they might be able to make a decision, and I think that they almost felt like they didn't have their winner yet. You know what I mean? It's not to say they didn't like some of the people they met with, but I think they felt like they wanted to almost start again or search deeper. At some point in time, Tom Fitzgerald also became available after he parted ways with the Devils. And, he's viewed as a strong candidate there. So, they've had maybe some different dynamics than the other ones, but you're right. It's been a long go, and, all these teams recognize this now, but the combine's in a couple weeks and scouting meetings need to be happening, and you got to be preparing for, making decisions on extending qualifying offers to players in June, making decisions if you're going to be buying anyone out. Like there's just a lot for front offices that, even in teams that aren't making news right now, there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes in all these markets, getting ready for the summer season. And, when you don't have a GM in place, that work just can't be fully done. There's still people working in Nashville, still people working in Vancouver, but you're looking for direction from the top, and you don't have a top person right now. And so, I think that wouldn't be surprising to see both those searches wrapped up here very quickly as a result of sort of the pressures of those timelines.
Okay. Last thing for you. Thoughts on Macklin Celebrini being named team captain for Team Canada at the IIHF World Championship in Switzerland this spring?
I mean, it's fascinating timing. Certainly no one is doubting what Macklin is as a player or person. I think that's pretty clear by now. He's a special guy. And so you would always have expected this would be an outcome for him wearing the C for his country. But the fact he's doing it before his 20th birthday is notable. And, that Team Canada over there has a lot of experience. It has guys like Ryan O'Reilly and John Tavares who are wearing the A's. Both those players have been part of numerous leadership teams on the national team over the years. You've got other experienced players, Darnell Nurse, Morgan Riley, Matt Barzell, Mark Scheifele. It's a team. Canada did send over a pretty deep roster. And so the fact that they chose the youngest player, at least among the skaters on the roster, to be the captain, I mean, what a moment. What a strong statement it is about Celebrini. Obviously, he's been drawing sort of the Crosby comparisons, I think, going back a year. But this guy played in the World Under-18s, Julian, in 2023. He was on Team Canada's top line at the Olympics in 2026. Talk about a meteoric rise from the under-18s to World Juniors to playing at the Olympics. Now he's the captain at his second World Championship, all before his 20th birthday. I mean, he seems like such a grounded kid. I don't even know if any of this stuff phases him, but it's the kind of thing you could start to look back on and be like, wow, how did all this happen? I mean, again, as great as he is, these are not things that Hockey Canada would normally do. I think it's a sign of how special Celebrini is. And it's a big tournament for Canada. They haven't won that tournament in 3 years, which is not an eternity for most countries, but obviously the expectation, I think, for Canadian teams to win gold is always high. And when you look at between the World Junior performance, they had a bunch of silvers at the Olympics. I just feel like Canada hasn't done as much winning as the Canadian teams, and this is at the women's level, at the men's level, World Junior level. Canada hasn't won as much as they're accustomed to. So, I think there's a little extra burden to get it done. And I know in speaking to some people around the team, they were really pleased Celebrini came and went to the Worlds, coming off a 115 point season, coming off playing at the Olympics. He easily could have passed. I don't think anybody would have been upset if that had been the case, but they're pretty pleased that he came, and, he's the future of Canadian hockey. And the way I view it, at least on the men's side of the game, that the future is now that he's going to play at that tournament. It's going to be a hell of a tournament too. I mean, I always carve out space and give it more love maybe than the average North American hockey watcher. But between Barkov returning to play for Finland, his first game since the Stanley Cup final, you got Ivar Stenberg is who's in the mix for the top pick. I did have someone send me a note, by the way, about our conversation on Stenberg versus Gavin McKenna, and just made some pretty sharp points about Stenberg maybe, having more of a claim just straight up as the best player in this draft that I might have overlooked. So just some food for thought, just looking at a lot of the underlying data. looking at the fact that it's probably the most dominant Swedish prospect in terms of his performance, Stenberg's this year in the SHL since Rasmus Dahlin was the number 1 overall pick in Buffalo. Anyway, some food for thought. I mean, we'll probably dig into that conversation more, especially when we see Stenberg play at the Worlds, how at home he looks in that event. It's being hosted in Switzerland. Switzerland's been a runner-up 3 times in the last decade. Can they win on home ice? Will be interesting. They've got a pretty strong team in terms of, their NHLers coming over. Anyway, it's going to be a great tournament and be fascinating to see. Like last year was like, wow, Celebrini's not only he's at the Worlds, he's playing with Crosby. It's like now Celebrini's expected to lead the team. He's the captain. He's going to be their top line center. It's been a pretty crazy 12 months for him, and he hasn't missed a beat. So I wouldn't expect that to be the case. He had 4 points in an exhibition game on Sunday too. So looks like he's ready to play.
That's awesome, man. Like the moment not being too big for him in any respect. Like I think that's probably the coolest storyline to look at ahead of the World Championship. I'll add this one too. I think Matthew Tkachuk is on that Team USA team as well. I think he's trying to be the first American player to complete the triple to join the Triple Gold Club. It's kind of hard to believe there's been no other Americans who have done it.
Well, the reason is because the U.S. won its first World Championship last year in like 90 years.
96 years, yeah.
So, you need a world, for anyone who's not familiar, it's an Olympic gold, a World Championship gold, and a Stanley Cup. Obviously, the U.S. hadn't won a men's Olympic gold medal in a long time either. Right. So that's been one of the reasons. Jackson Lacombe can still also claim a spot in the Triple Gold Club if Anaheim wins a cup this spring. So, it's only a matter of time now that a bunch of those players are 2/3 of the way there. But pretty neat of Tkachuk, Matthew, to go over to the Worlds because, that's not a U.S. team packed with a lot of NHL experience. And, he's obviously he's an outlier in that. And I'm sure he's going to do everything he can to try to get that gold medal. I mean, USA hockey's been, when I say Canada's not been winning golds, USA hockey's been winning golds at every level with men, women, and Paralympic hockey as well. Senior, world juniors, world under 18s, all that stuff. So the USA has been on quite a roll and they'll try to keep that going too.
It's a lot of winning. Anyway, CJ, great work as always. We'll be back later this week with a brand new episode of the CJ Show. We will also have stick taps. I think I have a pretty good idea as to who I'm going to give a stick tap to, but we'll still get through stick taps.
Monday, you're already like ahead to Thursday.
I'm like kind of still on vacation, so I still don't really know what day it is. Technically. If it wasn't for this podcast, I'd be like, it's like Sunday or something.
Well, thanks for coming off vacation and doing your thing, my friend.
This isn't really work for me. This is fun. Anyways, thanks so much to everyone for listening. We'll be back later this week with a brand new episode of The CJ Show. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Hey, did you like the thing you just watched?
Was it hilarious? Was it informative? Was it me losing my mind?
Possibly. Potentially. Most of the time it is. Hey, listen, if you like what SDPN has to offer, you should check out more of our videos and subscribe to our channel by clicking subscribe, or Steve will find you.